Today, the subcommittee is meeting to consider 4 bills. 3 of the bills will improve the Indian Health Services or the IHS, and the 4th would return lands to Alaska Native Village corporations that have been held by the state of Alaska for unfulfilled purposes. First, I want to especially thank Congressman Dusty Johnson for working with this subcommittee on improving IHS and being a champion for improving the tribal health system for all tribes. Last July, the subcommittee held a hearing on Congressman Johnson's Restoring Accountability in the Indian Health Service Act in draft form. After much discussion, this subcommittee and Congressman Johnson decided to take 3 key elements from the larger bill and introduce them as individual bills that we think get at specific issues that we can improve right now. The first bill is H.R. 8942, the Improving Tribal Cultural Training for Providers Act of 2024, of which I am very proud to sponsor. H.R. 8942 would require a mandatory annual training program for specific employees of the IHS on the history and culture of the tribes that they are serving. Because IHS's mission is to work with American Indian and Alaska Native people to promote their physical, mental, social, and spiritual health, IHS healthcare providers need cultural competence to best serve their patients. Several studies have indicated that culturally appropriate healthcare can improve doctor-patient relationships and improve health outcomes for patients. Currently, IHS employees are required to have training on the history and culture of the tribes they serve, but it is not an annual requirement. My bill would also explicitly state which IHS employees should have annual training requirements. Each of our 574 federally recognized tribes has a unique history and culture. It is vital that healthcare providers receive the education they need to connect with the patients that they serve, and that this training requirement has the flexibility needed to avoid a one-size-fits-all approach. Many tribally run healthcare programs already provide this education for their healthcare providers, and we can learn from them to make this requirement work. The second bill is H.R. 8955, the IHS Provider Integrity Act, introduced by Congressman Dusty Johnson. H.R. 8955 would require the IHS to solicit the history of an applicant from every state medical board where the applicant is licensed. The IHS would also be required to notify each state medical board where a provider is licensed if IHS begins an investigation into the provider. The IHS has consistency issues surrounding healthcare provider licensing, including providers being hired without full review of all of their licenses, and IHS providers with lapsed licenses continuing to work at IHS facilities. This long-standing issue first came to national attention in 2010 when the Senate Committee on Indian Affairs investigated the many issues surrounding IHS facilities operating in the Great Plains area. That investigation found that the IHS lacked a proper system to detect practitioners using revoked, suspended, or otherwise inadequate licenses. Later investigations continued to show that doctors were hired without full license checks at IHS facilities in violation of IHS policies, thereby imperiling patients. It is important that the IHS holds providers to a high level of care. H.R. 8955 would work to ensure all parties have the information necessary to keep their patients safe and make the best hiring decisions possible. The third bill, H.R. 8956, the Uniform Credentials for IHS Providers Act of 2024, introduced by Congressman Newhouse, would require the IHS to establish a uniform and centralized service-wide credentialing system. This system would be formally reviewed at least every 5 years. Credentialing is the process by which healthcare providers are evaluated to show that they have the proper education, training, and licenses to fulfill a position at a healthcare facility. IHS has its own process of credentialing providers that requires medical staff to meet the credentialing and privileging standards of a national accrediting body like the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services. However, the credentialing process has not been in practice the same across all IHS facilities and has specifically not caught issues of lapsed licenses as previously mentioned. While the IHS has initiated the process to create a centralized credentialing system in recent years, Congress has a responsibility to conduct oversight on the process and ensure that it meets the highest standard and is implemented consistently. The final bill up for discussion today is H.R. 6489, the Alaska Native Village Municipal Lands Restoration Act of 2023, introduced by Congresswoman Peltola. This bill would amend Section 14C3 of the Alaska Native Claims Settlement Act, or ANCSA, to return lands back to the Alaska Native Village corporations that are currently held in trust by the state of Alaska for future municipalities. ANCSA was enacted to settle the Aboriginal land claims of Alaska Natives, and Alaska Native corporations were created to receive land and disperse payments to Alaska Natives. The settlement also included a provision requiring Alaska Native Village corporations to convey some land to an existing municipality. However, if no municipality existed, the land was conveyed to the state of Alaska to be held in trust for a future municipality. As of today, 83 village corporations still have land held in trust for the purposes of a municipality which has not yet been created and likely never will be. There was no sunset date for this provision, so this land remains in limbo, unable to be developed. Village corporations would anticipate developing this land if returned for housing, community buildings, and other economic development projects. H.R. 6489 would also amend ANCSA to return this land and eliminate the requirement in statute. I want to take the time to thank our witnesses for being here today, and I look forward to today's discussion. H.R. 8942, I'm going to direct my questions to Mr. Benjamin Smith, my first couple of questions. H.R. 8942 would require mandatory annual training on the history and culture of the tribes involved for specific employees. Mr. Smith, what is the current format for tribal history and culture training for IHS employees?
Thank you, Chair, for the question. As we know, the Indian Health Service is one of the primary healthcare providers to American Indians, Alaska Natives, but we're not the only federal agency that works with American Indian, Alaska Native governments. So our approach in looking at training, and as you can see in our testimony, we do recommend that each IHS service unit develop a unique orientation for all staff regarding cultural training appropriate to each tribe served by an Indian healthcare facility, understanding that some facilities serve multiple tribes, and there could be distinct differences.
Let me just ask it a little bit different way then. Is there any standard within IHS specific to the format for tribal history and culture training?
Absolutely. And the lens that we have taken and have implemented over the past 3 years is a trauma-informed care approach. As we know, trauma resulting from violence, victimization, colonization, and systematic racism have played a part in American Indian and Alaska Native lives. So on an annual basis, all of our employees are required to take a mandatory training on an annual basis to become trauma-informed. Specific
to this issue, but that's specific to trauma?
Correct, which covers the historical trauma and history of American Indians and Alaska Natives in this country, as well as some of the intergenerational trauma for those who may have not personally experienced what previous generations have done. But that approach really sets a common framework across our system to have a basic understanding of the history and experience of American Indians and Alaska Natives in this country.
I'm going to direct my next couple of questions to Ms. Torres. H.R. 8942 includes in the list of employees mandated to take the annual mandatory training locum tenens providers or medical providers or practitioners that temporarily fill a need at the facility. Can you expand on whether this type of medical employee needs to receive cultural training, and if so, should they be added to the annual requirement?
I appreciate the question. H.R. 8942 includes in the list of employees mandated to take the annual mandatory training Also includes locum tenens providers or medical practitioners that temporarily fill in at a facility. I believe that all providers that come to the communities that are placed in those communities need cultural training to learn the best approach possible for competent care. Also gaining the trust of the patient so that you can continue to have that good experience going forward and continue to combat the healthcare comorbidities in conjunction with the patient so that the overall care is achieved. Pijayu.
Okay, and I'm going to direct my next questions to Chairman Erickson and Ms. Torres and Ms. Church. Several written statements highlighted, statements that were provided, highlighted that each federally recognized tribe has its own history and culture, and any mandated tribal and cultural training should be flexible enough to accommodate the area the IHS facility and employees are serving. By that I mean geographical area. Can each of you expand on what you think are the best practices that IHS should follow as they offer their current training, and if there are specific ideas we should add to HR 8942 to improve it? Chairman Erickson, you first, please.
Thank you for that question. And you're right. There are, here at Colville, we are 12 different tribes into one tribe now. So there's 4 different languages. We're very unique in that. So there's a lot of culturally involved things that are different for each respective tribe that we represent. So I think there's multiple ways they can go about this. You can do, online modules, in-person classes, but I think the best approach would be community immersive training. Because it's very specific to each tribe, and the tribes are similar to us that are confederation, that it's not a one-size-fits-all even within our tribe. So again, that is, I think, getting those involved in the community and our elders will help with that a lot in creating that training for those individuals.
Ms. Church, if you can briefly give your thoughts on this.
Certainly. There are shared values across many of the tribes. There's diversity, but there's also shared values. So if emphasizing those shared values, I think is very important. Additionally, I think looking to our elders, as we do, to provide that guidance. At the Great Plains Tribal Leaders Health Board, we have a Wiaksapa committee of respected elders across the Great Plains who guide us as we not only do our orientation, but also incorporate traditional cultural values and traditional healing into our work. So looking to those wisdom keepers is an important part of the process.
Okay. And Ms. Torres, very briefly, if you have any ideas.
Yes, thank you so much. I would just want to make sure that they are consulting with tribes early and often on what that process will be, and again, making sure to include our youth and elders, as those are our most precious commodities, and we want to get that feedback and that buy-in from our communities. Pija'u.
Okay, thank you. I do appreciate all of you giving us ideas, and I would hope that you would continue to stay engaged on this very important issue.